Y estamos grabando, Fencas grabando. Today's a very interesting, different episode to what I'm used to. I think this is the first time somebody outside the world of the arts has reached out. But aunque no es específicamente con la arte, it is also an artistic project, ya que it uses oral histories and writing. Estamos hoy con la profesora Dr. Ricia Chansky y someone who is also an educator, a writer, a small business owner herself, Zaira Arvelo. They are members of the project Mi María, surviving the hurricane, if I'm not mistaken. No, the storm, my bad. So yeah, first off, ¿cómo estamos? How are we doing?
Good, good. Happy to be here with you, Fan. Thank you very much for having us.
Gracias por la invitación. Muy bien, conectándonos desde Lares en esta tarde.
Oh, so cool.
I was in your neighborhood this morning, Zaira. I waved to you as I drove down the street.
Profe, are you currently in Maya or in Rincon?
I'm at home in Rincon, and I was doing a little bit of field work in Utuado this afternoon. So I drove past Lares and I shouted out the window, "Hello, Zaira," but she didn't answer.
Cool. So today we have a connection that's strange from Lares to Rincon to where I'm currently at, Carolina, almost Trujillo Alto. So it's a island-wide connection, which is exactly what happened throughout the entirety of Maria, the entire island, for the impacts of the storm. So I think I have sort of an idea of when the project started, because I think I remember when I was doing my master's, La Profe was working, I guess, with the baby steps of the project.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, what was the genesis, the inception of the project as a whole?
Yeah, thank you, Fan, and thank you for sparking that memory for me. I know that this is a show about the Mi María project, but I want to say that I collaborated with Fan on an essay that we published during those terrible days after the hurricane. A group of faculty members in the Department of English at Recientemente came together to write about their experience. And Fen also had an incredibly beautiful project in which he invited students to share poetry, and he helped them publish that so that their voices could be heard. And I think a lot of this project is rooted in that idea that as faculty members, we don't receive training on what are we going to do in the middle of disaster and the middle of catastrophe. And so Fan, who is a wonderful poet, took his skill and brought it into his class and said, "Hello, students, do you want to write about your experiences?" And another friend of ours took his interest in community learning projects and brought groups of students up into the mountains to do service work. My background is in autobiography studies. It's in how do people tell the stories of their lives, whether that's through writing, through music, through painting, through photography. And so when we went back into the classroom in those days, those were incredibly harsh days where we knew that our students didn't have enough food to eat. We knew that they didn't have places to sleep. We knew that their families had been broken apart in many ways. And so we were all just trying to come up with something to do in class that would support them. And so I invited the students enrolled in my course to write hurricane memoirs. That's what I knew. That's what I could teach. And I said, if you want to share a story with me, please feel free to share a story with me. And the stories that were told to me were very overwhelming. They were written with pen on paper because there was no electricity. I read them by candlelight because there was no electricity. The words screaming and crying were repeated again and again. Students talked about how Puerto Rico and their hometowns looked like post-apocalyptic spaces. And there was a student who wrote that the saddest thing she had ever seen in her life was her neighbors digging graves in their backyard because family members had passed away because they had treatable illnesses, but there was no electricity and the hospital in their town remained closed. So that was kind of the genesis of this for me, reading those narratives, talking to you, Fan, talking to other people and saying, what can we do to support our students? There isn't enough support for them. And that's what caused me to apply for a fellowship from an organization named Voice of Witness. And I won the fellowship. And what I did with that was I created an oral history course that was a disaster-based and trauma-informed oral history course. And I did that with Jocelyn Heliga Vargas. She also taught courses, another faculty member at our university. And we trained together 100 undergraduate students in how to collect oral histories in an ethical manner, how to work in translation, how to work bilingually. And then Marcy Denisak, who Jocelyn and you and I and Marcy all worked on that article together that we published. Marcy and I drove across the archipelago. We drove across the main island of Puerto Rico and then took the ferry out to Culebra to collect oral histories and look at really community response. What were everyday people in the community doing these heroic acts? And that's how I met Zaira. Zaira's the first person that I interviewed for this project.
Awesome, that's beautiful, that's beautiful. I wanted to ask entonces, Zaira, I read a bit about like your personal experience throughout Maria due to the email that I was sent. But me imagino que the story is in the book per se. But
Yes.
if you could share at least like an overview of what was your experience.
Absolutely. En mi caso, yo decido unirme al proyecto porque pues Ricia me contacta y sé que viene, como dicen por ahí, bien recomendada. Siempre había escuchado excelentes cosas sobre el tipo de profesora que ella es y yo dije, wow, ¿verdad? No sabía mucho del proyecto, pero decidí unirme. En ese entonces era el tipo de tiempo en el que la escritura era un desahogo, en el que si yo no me saco esto de encima, si no se lo digo a alguien, como que se queda conmigo. And that's how I started collaborating, right? So I wanted to use writing and use my voice in a way that could help me process what had happened, but could also bring awareness to what was still happening in the island to many people. And in my case, we lived in a neighborhood. We rented at the time in Aguadilla, specifically in Camaselles, right next to a main road. So if you ever travel to Aguadilla to go to one of its main spots, which is Crash Boat, we were like one street behind that road. So, we are next to a main road, close to the airport. And of course, we are on the other side of the road, meaning we are not next to the ocean. There is no river, nothing. So we're thinking that what we are going to protect ourselves from, like most people, is the wind. And that wasn't the case. We received a constant flow of water in our house. And by us, I mean my husband and I. And when the FEMA inspector finally came in those many weeks or months after, I no longer recall the time, he marked over 6 feet of water inside our house, meaning that our neighborhood had an even higher amount of water. Nuestra casa es de estas casas en Puerto Rico en cemento, que son como que levantaditas, que tienen estos sótanos abiertos. Y teníamos muchísimos escalones frente a la casa, o sea, eran pies entre la casa y el nivel del suelo. Por lo tanto, si había 6 adentro más los escalones de afuera, estamos hablando mucho más de 10, 12 pies de agua. And we ended up not having a way to get out of our house. We used an emergency whistle. We flashed our neighbors because it happened when the night was falling. And as you know, there was no one who could hear your voice. I mean, they couldn't hear the whistle. They could have never heard me. So we ended up deciding to hunker down. And the first thing we had in mind was we had a boogie board and we had other things that we could use because we live so close to the ocean. The boogie got trapped under our refrigerator when it decided to sort of
Wow.
like burst in the air. And the only thing we had was an air mattress, a patched up air mattress. It wasn't even a new one. It was a hand-me-down from a family member. So we had patched it and we thought it would be comfortable for us to lay on it and hunker down during the storm. But it ended up being our raft. And I mean, from anywhere since the night started till the next day, almost at 11 a.m. And pretty much we were just there as the water rose and rose and rose and finally decided to stop. And we knew it had stopped because we will mark the walls with a permanent marker
Whoa.
because we will lose track of how high the water was. I mean, you're not used to being in your house in that angle, laying down, looking up. And at the end, meaning late at night till the next day, we couldn't even sit down. We didn't have enough space between the mattress and the ceiling to sit down. All we could do was lay down. And I remember my husband measuring with his from elbow to the tip of his fingers. And that's pretty much what we had of space for
Wow.
ourselves. Y no fue hasta el próximo día que unas jóvenes del vecindario siguieron molestando y siguieron jeringando y diciendo a la gente que ellas escuchaban un silbato, que ellas pensaban que allá adentro en ese revolú de agua había gente. Y ese día llegó un kayak, de la nada llegó un kayak y nos comunicamos por los cristalitos que tenemos aquí en las puertas de madera en la parte de arriba, amarillitos, rojos y verdes. Pues yo rompí uno con un martillo que tenía en el bulto de emergencia, rompo el martillo con el martillito y por ese boquetito de cristal nos logramos comunicar. Y entonces pues de ahí vino el cómo abrimos la puerta, ¿no? Porque era de madera y se había ensanchado con todas esas horas de agua y no era agua limpia, es escorrentía y era agua de nuestro pozo séptico. Así que no era el tipo de agua en el que tú te sientes cómoda, yo me voy a tirar es agua clear, pues ese no era el caso, no era un agua ni limpia ni colía bien, pero no fue hasta que esas personas llegaron, que eran jóvenes, que eran unos muchachos que nunca habíamos conocido, que pudimos salir de la casa. O sea, nosotros no nos sacaron los bomberos, no nos sacó la Guardia Costanera, no nos sacó la policía, el municipio, nadie. Fue la misma gente de la comunidad y personas que nunca habíamos conocido. Y así más o menos, pues, verla con mucho más detalle y una narrativa mucho más bonita o aterradora, depende del punto de vista, pues la pueden ver en uno de los capítulos del libro, donde soy una de las narradoras.
Wow. No, it's funny porque I guess we're so used to watching disaster through images que cuando uno la escucha así de la voz de la persona o quizás leyéndola, uno se recrea la historia en la mente. It's
Right.
kind of more shocking. Que por eso me quedé ahora boquiabierto. Because it was just a disaster movie, basically. Pero this time it's real life. Before recording, the professor asked you a question regarding your small business. So for the people who are listening, again, I asked the same question that the professor did. ¿Cuándo fue que empezó el small business? Y,
Pues yo tuve, ¿verdad? Disculpa que te interrumpa y seguimos con la próxima pregunta de la excelente idea de renunciar a mi trabajo como profesora a tiempo completo en la Universidad de Puerto Rico, pero por contrato, como somos muchos, o decimos en inglés adjuncts. Yo renuncié en julio del 2017, abro el negocio que se llama Professional Writing and Development, 100% a la distancia, todo bien tecnológico antes de que fuese cool por la pandemia. Abro en agosto y en septiembre llega María y lo perdemos todo, así que me duró un mes el negocio, more or less.
Yeah, so lo que te iba a preguntar attached to that question era, have you continued to work with it? Y cómo la pandemia y todo lo que ha pasado después de María has allowed you to adapt to the situation, or how has the job, the employment, the work, the small business
Mira,
to
el
evolve?
primer año, o sea, el año de agosto a diciembre de 2017, yo tal vez generé $800, que $800 no son nada cuando tú has tenido un salario fijo, cuando tú tienes un doctorado, o sea, que tú te ganas 4 cifras fácil al mes.
Yeah.
Y de momento, pues, en un semestre completo te ganas $800 y renunciaste a un trabajo, pero a la misma vez no era un trabajo donde tenía estabilidad, era todo por contrato y era en eso mismo contrato de 5 a 6 meses. Por eso fue que tomé esa decisión, ¿verdad? De irme por mi cuenta y sí, reviví el negocio después de... yo me eché mi torre de computadora bien heavy al hombro ese día del huracán y la trepé encima de un closet. Los monitores no me dieron tiempo porque estaban bolted on the walls. Tenían estas piezas que estaban ya atornillados y en lo que uno busca un destornillador en el momento en el que tú estás pensando que es lo más importante que yo debo de guardar, pues los monitores se quedaron. Y cuando por fin tuvimos un poquito de señal de teléfono, estuvimos contactando familiares en Estados Unidos porque la diáspora fue clave también para esta recuperación. Y les solicitamos que nos enviaran unas laptops que tuvieran batería de larga duración. Y con esas laptops fue que pudimos seguir con el negocio corriendo. Y hasta el día de hoy seguimos trabajando ahí a tiempo completo.
Super cool.
Así que, ¿verdad? Todas esas destrezas de poder comunicarnos a la distancia, trabajar remoto, organizándonos sin tener un jefe, e ir trabajando en esa marca personal, pues me ayudó muchísimo al éxito que tiene el negocio hoy.
Cool. Profe, when I was reviewing the email, I noticed that the book has 17 testimonies, 17 oral histories. Was that number on purpose due to the year of the hurricane, or how did that decision come about?
Wow, fun. That was I can see your poet's eyes looking out into that. What we did, Fen, and I'm gonna call it a happy accident. What we did, Fen, was we worked with students who were enrolled in those first courses, and myself and Marcy helped students edit to the level of professional writing. And as a professional writer, you know how many drafts and how many different stages you go through. And so it wound up that 8 of the students who started out in that class wound up with their narratives being included in the book. And what we decided to do, Voice of Witness supports what's called a long-form oral history, which is a birth till now model, which says we don't want to reduce you to the experience of disaster. We want to hear about your whole life and situate the disaster within your whole life. So for example, Zaira's story is a whole life story in which she's talking about growing up in Lares and what does it mean to grow up with Grito de Lares in your world, in the air that you breathe. And so that kind of sets the stage for these conversations about Puerto Rico. But then in her narrative, she moves into being a child and discovering books and discovering this love of reading and going to college. And I think in her first week of college, there's a box of free books out there. And it changes her world to say, here are these novels. And so the long form oral history is this kind of trajectory. How do we get to the place where we see Zaira and her partner Juan Carlo in their house, losing their possessions, and she started this business for writing, for translation, and so the trajectory of being a reader is there. And then Zaira actually returns to this neighborhood where she rented a home and helps the neighborhood by writing letters, by being the person who has that kind of professional experience of writing. And it's this whole circle for the narrative. But then in addition to that, we look towards testimonio, which is a very honored tradition in Latin America of the testimonio, which is a shorter, more focused, issue-driven piece. And we worked with a student and his narrator who the mother in the family was sent home from the hospital and told that she had no problems. And later that day, she passed away in the arms of her children. And they could not get the Office of Forensic Science to tell them why their mother passed away. And so this issue that we struggled with, where there were refrigerator trucks in San Juan that held onto the bodies of people who had passed during the hurricane, and families could not receive answers. So we looked at the issue based upon this sort of focused, shorter story. And then we have one narrative that is told by a married couple who have been married for a number of years, and they are in Adjuntas and they have a coffee farm. And so they were telling the story of their crops being destroyed, not just during Maria, but during George. So in the previous Hurricane George, the entire crop was destroyed. And then in Maria, the entire crop was destroyed again. And I bring that up because they're telling the story together. They're this very loving couple who have been together for 60 years. And it's a beautiful way of writing and a beautiful way of telling a story. And so what I'm saying as an answer is we tried to experiment. We tried to say the long form oral history does one thing, the testimony does another thing, the dual narrative does another thing. We want to get as many students in here as we possibly can, and we want to get as many voices in here as we possibly can. And we wound up with 17, and then we're like, look, it's 17.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I also wanted to ask, are the four corners and the middle of the island and Vieques and Culebras, are they all represented within the book, or?
Yeah, that's a great question, Fen. I have to admit that I was super naive when I started this project. We have 78 municipios, and I was like, 78 stories will be in the book. And then the editor of the book series was like, how long do you think that book would be? And I was like, oh, okay, nobody can have the money to pay for a book like that. So we have Culebra. We were not able to include Vieques in this book. We worked with Fundación de Culebra, and they were wonderful helping us set up narratives. And I'm just going to go from east to west. We developed a wonderful partnership in La Perla, and so we have a beautiful narrative from La Perla. We went through the mountains and focused on Adjuntas and Utuado. We have Aria Metro, and then we do focus a little bit more on the West Coast just because the project is located in Mayaguez. So we have Aguada, Aguadilla, Arecibo, Mayaguez.
And you missed Juncos and Miramar.
Yeah.
We do have stories from like the eastern and northern parts.
Thank you. Yeah. And this is probably a good time to mention that, one of the most beautiful parts of this project for me is the friendships that have developed with both narrators and students. Not that you're not friends with students, but to get to know students in this wholly different way. And so I'm very blessed to have this friendship with Zaira now. And one of the things that happens with the Voice of Witness books, here's a book, is that a free curriculum is offered with the book. It's published with the book. And so when it came time to have the discussion of, do you know an educator who you really like and really trust? I was able to say, Zaira, who is a narrator and is the first narrator in the book, is an educator with a business to do this work. And so Zaira is the main person who created the curriculum for this book. And she's created bilingual lessons. She's created lessons for a variety of classrooms, and she's created even specialized lessons for ESL classrooms that are all available for free. And I'm proud of her, and I'm sharing her good work.
No. I also wanted to ask, there have been many projects that come about regarding Maria. Of course, this is one of them. But being how things are nowadays, where one project can expand to multiple platforms, has there been a consideration to expand the project into maybe podcasting or short documentaries of some form? Just leave it at the book.
Yeah. Are you volunteering, Fen?
Just yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Fen. One of the things that happened, as I think most people know, is that on December 28th, 2019, we started an ongoing earthquake swarm in which the first of over thousands of earthquakes off the southwest coast of the main island of Puerto Rico started plaguing people, put thousands of people in a tent city. One of the main tent cities was flooded. So not only were you displaced from your home, but then your tent city was flooded. And in January of 2020, there was a 6.4 earthquake that did substantial damage. And shortly after that, we entered the global pandemic of COVID-19. And so how do we say to people, shelter in place, don't leave your home when your home's destroyed? Today, almost 4 years after Hurricane Maria, we have 20,000 homes in Puerto Rico that still do not have a roof, that still have a blue roof, in which FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers say is good for up to 3 months. Mm-hmm. So how are we still having homes 4 years later with 3-month tarps? How do you ask people to wash their hands repeatedly when they don't have access to water? And so we have what I call stratified disasters, and how the project is growing at this moment is we're trying to continue our work with oral histories, and not just collecting stories of disasters and pandemic, but also artwork and other documents related to how people survive. And we're trying to memorialize the heroism, the absolute heroism of human beings who are creatively working to protect their communities, and also share stories that have valuable information for multiple other communities around the world who are unfortunately suffering from some of the same things that we are, both with the pandemic and with climatological disasters.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect segue to what was my other question going to be. I guess this book would kind of, in a way, serve as a closing of that part of our current history of disasters. But I was wondering if there are brainstormings going about maybe doing the same with the earthquakes or the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah. So I did a pilot project that looked at what does it mean to still be in the aftermath? Because even 4 years later, if you have 20,000 homes that don't have roofs, you're still in the aftermath because that hasn't been fixed yet. And then there are other ongoing issues, and we could have a whole separate conversation about disaster capitalism and the ways in which people are coming to buy up land, to buy up resources because of the disasters that are ongoing. We could have a whole separate conversation about PROMESA and the FOMB and how La Junta is creating a humanitarian crisis in which it's attacking education, it's attacking social welfare, and it's hurting people. And so just within those contexts, this pilot project looks to say, what does it mean to be in ongoing aftermaths from 2 substantial hurricanes while there's a global pandemic? And those interviews are working to connect people, and I'm very glad to share that this coming year we'll be starting an oral history lab in Mayaguez on campus. And Fran, you will be delighted to know that it brings the film certificate in. So the film certificate is one of our partners. We're going to be working with documentary filmmaking. We're partnering also with the library, and we're going to be talking about both digital archiving and digital exhibition, like geospatial mapping. How would we create a map of the archipelago? And then as you're looking at the map, you could click on Culebra, and a Culebra narrative would come up, Culebra information would come up, photos would come up, etc. So we're branching out. I remember giving a presentation that the dean came to, and at the end of the presentation, he's like, "Well, Chansky, this is good work, but could you now go down to the tent city and interview everybody in the tent city?" And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to breathe first. But that's exactly what we're establishing in Mayaguez right now, Fan. And we hope it will be something that will be a resource for our communities. We don't want it to be something that stays on campus. We want it to be something where Brigada del Oeste, Fundación Surfrider, all the different organizations that have left my mind at this particular moment, because I'm trying to think of them, could call up and say, look, we're doing this citizen scientist program. Look, we're doing this mutual aid dinner. Look, we need to organize and we need to help in this way. And then we could come out and say, let's record what's going on, so that one, we don't forget the amazing things that are happening, but two, so that people don't have to learn again and again. How do we deal with disaster? How do we deal with crisis? Here are some set ways that have worked, and let's think about those.
Super cool, super cool. Earlier you showed the book, so I wanted to ask, this is coming out on October 11th, I believe? But
September 16th, September 16th.
The book, but the podcast will come out on October, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
Sorry.
Where can people find the book if they want to read it?
Okay, so if you'd like to read the book, it is published by Haymarket Books, and it's available on their website. And our funder was Voice of Witness, and it's available through the Voice of Witness website as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. As you know, Zoom cuts things off at 40 minutes, but I think I got most of my questions down.
Sure.
So if there's anything you want to plug, where can people find, again, where can people contact you? Zaira, where can people find you on your small business? All that good stuff.
Well, in my case, I just wanted to add that, as Ricia mentioned, it's the type of book that has implications for Puerto Rico, but also for other locations and every other human being on the planet that is fighting against the survival we're having to do with climate change. In the case of Puerto Rico, the same issues that were present in 2017 are still here. We still have lakes that have not been cleaned, treated in any way. Aquí no tenemos dragados, no han sucedido de forma organizada, ni han sido canalizados. We're still speaking in Lares, for example, of such an unreliable water service that every time it rains and the power goes out, the water goes out. We do not get water. So we get like 2 days of water a week. We're still speaking about the same issues with maritime transport and everything that's related with a second-class citizenship. So this is not just a look at the past, it's a look at these big issues that are applicable still to Puerto Rico and to many other places around the globe. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And in terms of where you can find me, I do appear as Dr. for Doctor, Dr. with the same name you see under my screen, Zaira Arvelo, on Facebook and Twitter. And on Instagram, I appear using the acronym for my business, which is PWD, as in Peter, Willie, and maybe Diana, PR, that's it, PWD PR.
Perfect. And as for you, Professor, where can people contact you?
As for me, my university email address, I welcome anybody who wants to talk to me and talk about the project or tell their story to contact me. One of our beloved narrators in this book read about the project in Primera Hora, and she found my phone number and called me up and said, hello, I'm Wendy Diaz, and I have a story for you. And she did have a story for me, and it's a blessing to know her. She keeps offering to bake me cake. One day I'm going to go and eat cake with you, Wendy. And so if you have a story that you want to tell, I want to hear it. If you have ideas, if you have thoughts, if you have a mutual aid organization or a community organization, we would love to work with you. We're working on setting up mass listening sites. And so what that means is we would come with equipment and come with students who have been trained. And we would say, anybody who wants to walk through the doors and tell us a story, we're here to listen to the story. The project is fully bilingual. And so we're happy to speak in any language.
Awesome. And again, where can people find the book? Once again.
Find the book through Voice of Witness or through Haymarket Books, or send me an email and I'll put you in contact with somebody.
Beautiful. Well, before closing, I just want to say thanks once again for contacting me for the special interview. It's a great project, and I think more of the like should exist or should be going about. So before saying goodbye, I just want to say thank you for that. Mucha salud en lo que salimos
Ito.
the situation.
Yeah.
And pa'lante, siempre pa'lante.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Fen, I'm so happy to see you, and I'm so proud of you. You know, we will be doing some documentary filmmaking activities with this project, and if you think that that's something that maybe you want to do, circle back, hit up me, hit up Mary, and we'd be happy to talk to you.
Thank you. Will do. Will do.
Well, Ricia,
So-
always a pleasure to share the screen with you,
Yes,
my dear
Zaira,
friend.
my friend. Yes, yes.
Y un placer,
Yes,
Fen.
I never get
Yeah.
tired of meeting with you, and I hope that we do more in-person meeting in the times to come.
Absolutely.
Fencast con Zaira Arvelo and Professor Dr. Ricia Chansky. We're set. Thank you once again.